This computer. Okay. Well, welcome to Anthro Perspectives. My name is Keith Kellerson. I'm an applied business and organizational anthropologist. And today I have with me Markus Rothmueller, who is a techno-anthropologist in Austria. And he's a techno-anthropologist by training and applies anthropology for business strategy, design facilitation, and product development. Originally educated as an industrial engineer, he first worked in the fields of future studies, consulting, and in different tech-related industries until he started to search for the best possible way to develop products in 2015, and eventually found a study called Techno-Anthropology in Copenhagen, Denmark, with a course called Anthropology-Based Product Development. As a techno-anthropology student then, he spent more than 2 years working on autonomous vehicles, their impact on future city traffic, and on developing interface concepts for the interaction between humans and autonomous vehicles, applying design anthropological approaches, social and philosophical theories, ethnographic research, and collaborating with human factor engineers and data scientists as part of the EU Horizon 2020 project Interact. After some years of freelancing during and after his studies, he now works in a corporate startup project building a new smart living and smart home platform solution. More recently, Markus has been elected to the board of conveners at the Applied Anthropology Network, which is the #1 platform for applied anthropologists in Europe and part of the European Associations for Social Anthropologists. So it's a great meeting and talking to you today. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, where you work, and what you're doing now?
Hi, Keith. Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks so much for your invitation to share my experiences here today. I'm flattered, and I'm sure it's going to be a pleasure based on our past talks that we had already. I can say that already now. Yeah, so quick introduction to myself. I'm a rather young or new anthropologist. As you mentioned in the introduction that you just gave, I started to develop a first interest in anthropology in 2015, and then decided to study Techno-Anthropology in 2016. So I studied from 2016 till 2018, and now applied anthropology for maybe 2 to 4 years, right? So yeah, and therefore it also feels a bit weird sometimes for me that I'm actually invited to talks like the one that we have today.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm also really convinced about bringing in anthropological perspectives and insights into industry and applying anthropology to other fields of jobs to our world. So I think eventually that's also maybe the reason why I got elected as a new convener for the Applied Anthropology Network in Europe, because I'm really so super convinced about it and the value of anthropology. Yeah, so I'm not so sure how interesting it is to listeners, but I'd like to share a bit about why and how I ended up turning to anthropology, because I think many people start out like me, but continue to their track without anthropology and I think that they are actually missing out on something. So going back quite a bit into my childhood, I was always very passionate about building things. So my parents had a big a garden with a workshop there where I started to handcraft and repair things very early on. And since then, I wanted to build really cool things more professionally. So that's why I actually started out studying engineering to begin with. And actually, I did enroll in multiple engineering degrees. So first electrotechnical engineering in Vienna, then mechanical engineering in Vienna. And in the end, it was industrial engineering that I finished. And after having gotten some experience from different product development jobs, I realized that just building a thing is not the coolest part about building things. I think the coolest part is actually finding out what to build first, and then knowing exactly how it should work, how it should look like, so that it also fulfills a job in the best possible way. So even though using machines and using the workshop was really fun, the coolest part actually was to understand what to build, why, and what it should be able to do in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. And that is basically what I'm applying or trying to achieve now. just that now I talk about products and services. I call myself applied business design or techno-anthropologist, depending on the context. And I'm engaged in spaces like the EU-funded project to build autonomous vehicle interaction systems, or smart home platforms as part of a corporate startup, and so on. So yeah, the real goal for me is to build the right product to begin with. In my experience, many people focus too much on how to build products and trusting best-selling processes like design thinking or agile or lean startup. And I think too often we just build stuff not having done the necessary homework first. So my job and my contribution to innovation really is to help build the right thing rather than just building a thing, but then the right way. So I think that's a classic saying already. Yeah, and I think the right products, or the right product, depends on the people or the other form of life or the reason you build it for. So I think you need to first understand why a certain offer or product will be valuable to someone. And to understand that, you first need to understand what it means to someone. And even then, so it's a lot about the value and the meaning, right? Anthropologists typically say that. And even then you need to do some sort of post-study actually to understand how people will adopt your product in real life settings, right? Not just in the laboratory, but in the real life setting, and what the product that you have built actually means then, because you can never predict that before, and design intention is never the thing that you have had in mind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so but maybe that's already a bit too much detail. What I really want to say is that to learn what might be the right product to build, I had to turn to anthropology first, right? I had to think about what really matters to the human being or to the group of people that want to use the product or service in the end. And I really mean that. My entire worldview changed because I studied Techno-Anthropology in Copenhagen. It's the one thing that I really love about my 1.5 years searching for the right study program was the one sentence in a Reddit forum or something, where a guy wrote, "I can promise you one thing: if you study anthropology, you will look at the world from a completely new perspective." Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And I think that's also what many people miss in their education in product development. So maybe quickly as a follow-up, because Techno-Anthropology is still a rather new study program, so maybe I just take the chance to promote a little bit of the content. Sure. So for me, Techno-Anthropology, I think Techno-Anthropology, the program it really depends on what you make out of it as a student. So for me, it meant two main things. On the one hand, we learned different methodologies and theories on how to do research to understand what product or service to build. So what's the right thing to build, right? As I said before. And on the other hand, we learned how to facilitate innovation processes and to reflect on how innovation works in the first place. So if you then actually do reflect on how innovation works, then you will find out or see easily that there are decades of best-selling approaches and frameworks like design thinking or anything else consultants had talked about before. And even though all of them claim to be the best approach and promise success, if you look at innovation projects and researchers did do those studies, you will see that you cannot simply replicate successful innovation just by following the same steps, right? It is not linear, it's messy, and you cannot replicate it. And that's, I think, one central thing that people in innovation, product development projects also have to understand these days. The second thing is that I think we need to understand that innovation is always about, or what you learn at Techno-Anthropology at least, is that innovation is always about power plays, right? So the most extreme form of this is what a business anthropology friend of mine that I just met recently in Vienna told me about his new boss, or he's working in a new company, and he told me about his new bosses that that they don't actually have to argue for their decisions, right? They don't have to reason for it. They just say, that's my decision, and that's it. Or they don't really ask or think about, do we actually have to look outside of our company to understand what kind of service or product should we build? That discussion does not even come up, right? It's not even the discussion about what kind of approach to choose to understand more about the users or customers. It's just that they don't do it in the first place. And I think there's many companies in the German-speaking area still, even though, of course, to be fair, it's getting better. But I think in the German-speaking area, there's many companies, and still also around the world, there are many companies and businesses and other organizations that still don't consider the user or customer or the person that is actually interacting with the services at the center. And in the end, it's about power plays. So whoever does the best presentation or whoever has the highest rank, it's influencing innovation, right? And the last thing that I want to mention here, what we learned in Techno-Anthropology is that innovation is always about socio-technical interplays. So on the macro level, we remember early debates about social construction versus technological determinism and meta questions about what's defining our world. And the point is that it's both. It's human and non-human actors like technology, and it's always about socio-technical interplays, power plays, and human technology relations, if you want to call it that way. And I think that's just some of the content that you would learn in Techno-Anthropology and some of the things that really changed my point of view on how to do innovation work. And I think, I think the real question for any innovation project anyway is, what is good innovation and what process should we follow to be successful, right? Yeah. But I don't know, what else did you want to?
No, that was interesting. I just wanted to kind of comment about some of the things you were talking about. The culture, the organizational culture you were talking about in your friend's company, where the decision was already made, right? There was no investigation or research into what the customer wanted or what was the best way to handle it. It was interesting when I interviewed Elizabeth Bryaby. I've probably mentioned her at every interview I've done, but she talks about this sort of decision-making processes that are different in different companies. And I often wondered, how is the culture affecting the way decisions are made in companies? And really, in her study, it was more of looking at each company for their own culture and how they made decisions. But later, I think on another point, I had talked to her that, yes, it was true. Of course, what you're saying is with these German-speaking countries, within that Germanic culture, the decision is made from the top. And that's the decision and that's it. There is no investigation or arguing or justifying the need for something different. And a lot of the decision-making processes that she went through was they were more or less trying to get their people to come to the same conclusion or the same decision the bosses have, rather than trying to persuade them to do something else. The decision was made and it was over. So I find that very, very interesting culturally as an organizational anthropologist.
It's actually, that's a very sad realization that I also had in a project that I don't want to mention here, of course, but the point was that we were trying to do research before actually deciding on what kind of product to build or what kind of system to build. But what we learned was that other stakeholders in the project that were also obviously responsible for some of the funding, and it's not my current project, it's a past project, they already decided what the prototype should look like and what the product should look like,
right,
before we ever started research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, it nearly had the character of saying, okay, let's do research to find whether we can somehow argue for the thing that we had in mind before anyway, right?
Right.
Just confirming, and it's not even confirmation bias, it's nearly actively trying to get the confirmation, just seeking for it, right? And I think that's something that might also happen. I think you also mentioned it with your one of your last episodes with I forgot his name. I think in one of your with Adam Gadwell.
Was it Matt Arts or Adam Gamwell?
Adam Gamwell, yeah, exactly. You mentioned it with him. I think that often companies that are focusing so much on quantitative research actually just say, okay, let's do another round of quantitative research because we didn't get the findings that we want to, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a big issue, I think, and I think that not just because I am an anthropologist by heart and still fresh, or junior, but still. But also, I'm super convinced that anthropologists can contribute to that issue in a massive way. And I just think it's a pity that we still have to fight for that kind of visibility and the jobs also in some points, right?
I also thought it was interesting. You were talking about your childhood and how you had the garden house and you were doing craftsmanship. And the first thing that popped in my head is just that whole tradition within German-speaking Europe of craftsmanship and woodworking and all of those things, and it makes me wonder if, and I'm sure it's true, that still in the modern culture, those things are still highly valued, and those skills are still very much valued. I mean, I know in fact in Germany, I mean, they have the sort of the journeyman craft person is still very much highly valued, and all the way back from building the big cathedrals and the big churches to these beautiful woodworking sculptures and this sort of thing. So I think that's probably part of the culture that's still there in German speaking.
Absolutely, totally. I mean, there's even a saying in the region that I'm currently working in, and also in a big region in Germany. There is a saying, work, build houses, right? So you just work, you earn money, you build your house, and that's your life. And the more you can, it's a very grounded worldview in a way, right? You're working, you're saving money until you can actually build your house, and ideally you can also build much of the house yourself to again save money to then get other things. So I think craftsmanship is very valued. That's true.
So I noticed in your background you worked for the German Aerospace Center. Tell me about your research there and what kind of insights you gained.
Sure. So the German Aerospace Center was actually the location where my team, which was Pernilla, Alexandra, and I, from my Techno-Anthropology program, wrote our master thesis. So before writing our master thesis at the German Aerospace Center, we already did 3 semesters on autonomous vehicles, right? 3-semester project. So in the first project, we looked into the whole technology of a self-driving car and how the different sensors work together to perceive the environment, and what are the limits and what are potential implications for future traffic situations, right? If the car cannot see a child or a ball or whatever, or a certain kind of material, or has a false positive or something like that, false negative, what happens then? What could potentially happen? And then we, in the first project, we kind of realized and concluded that we believe that the social interactions in traffic, how people communicate with each other, may it be the driver or me just seeing that the driver is looking at me and so on, is going to change significantly. That was our kind of finding or assumption based on the first technological assessment, where we also use social theories to look at it from a what we call socio-technical perspective. In the second semester project, we did an ethnographic or design anthropological study on the cycling culture in Copenhagen, and tried to say, okay, so if interaction does change or would change in future city traffic scenarios with the implementation of self-driving cars. What would that mean for the cycling culture in Copenhagen? Because that's massive, right? And cyclists are always endangered by cars already. Although obviously in Copenhagen, that's less the problem because they're having such a powerful standing already in the city. So one of the findings was, for example, that in a city like Copenhagen, cars are already very, or drivers are already very sensitive and looking for potential situations where they could hit a cyclist. Where in cities like Spain, for example, in Barcelona, it's much more hectic, and the cyclist does not typically have an own space on the street, on the road. Right? So there are definitely cultural implications or city-wide differences. And we looked specifically into the cycling culture of Copenhagen, and we did cultural probes with cyclists and future workshops where we tried to imagine scenarios where the cyclist had to interact with a self-driving car. And then they did some prototypes around that, and then we even organized another workshop with experts, also some from the traffic ministry from Copenhagen. Another one was Melissa Chevkin from Nissan back then. She worked at Nissan. She was also attending our workshop. We were super happy about that, as she was already our expert from the autonomous vehicle development industry side before. And we tried to understand, so if driverless cars have to interact with cyclists, how could that look like in the future, right? It was very early stage, and there was little to no research back then about that. So somehow we made it into different presentations, and one of them was at the Autonomous Vehicle Symposium in San Francisco in 2017, which was the kind of rebound invitation from Melissa Chevkin to show our work there. And simultaneously, we were talking to a European Union-funded Horizon 2020 innovation project called Interact, with partners like University of Leeds, the German Aerospace Center, Bosch, BMW, the Technical University of Munich, and so on and so on. And we talked to them and said, look, we have done some work on interaction between self-driving cars and humans in future. That's exactly what the project was about. Shouldn't we maybe, or couldn't we maybe become part of the project? And that's how we got in. And then we went for 4 months, I think, to the University of Leeds to study interactions between pedestrians and drivers in today's traffic to inform their kind of work. Then we went to the German Aerospace Center with the goal to take the insights from our research before and actually design our own kind of interaction concepts and human-machine interfaces for self-driving cars to communicate and interact with humans in future city traffic. And to come back to your question, I think one of our main findings, or one of our main research questions, were related to driver, like direct communication with the driver, right? We worked with data scientists in the university, or as part of the Interact project, who installed video cameras and LiDAR and other technological systems to estimate or to measure distance between the pedestrian and the car that it was approaching, and so on. And they looked at all sorts of kind of implicit factors like distance and speed to see how humans react to that. And we try to understand more ethnographically, I would say more ethnographic. It was not real ethnography maybe, but we used observations and interviews to find out how pedestrians or humans interacted with, or pedestrians interacted with drivers in very close, unregulated city traffic situations. And now I want to give a more precise answer to what you asked. What were our findings? I want to start by saying that we actually did a lot of exploratory observations, right? We did not just say, okay, let's focus on this scenario only. We looked into all sorts of different kind of intersections, traffic scenarios, and tried to understand in which of them might be human machine interfaces be necessary to begin with, right? So yeah, in the end, we focused on unregulated, close and rather slow traffic scenarios where the pedestrian wanted to cross or the cyclist wanted to cross in front of the approaching car. And that was kind of the scenario that we focused on. And there we found out that eye contact, for example, having eye contact, or just me as a cyclist or pedestrian seeing that the driver is looking towards me, is giving me so much more confidence and maybe a feeling of being acknowledged or being not acknowledged, right? If I see that you, Keith, look at me as a driver and you don't slow down, it's telling me already so much. You're seeing me, but you actually want to go. Or you're seeing me and you're slowing down. And the question was later, what is the difference between just slowing down and a driver looking at me and slowing down, right? And that's something that we looked into, and then based on that, tried to develop some human-machine interfaces that try to convey a similar message of, hey, I have seen you, or hey, I have detected that somebody is there. And these kind of different messages are quite important to discuss and define and say which kind of message do we actually want to convey. That's also related to legal actions, for example. If the car says, hey, you can go, but then the car drives, whose fault is it? Versus, hey, I detect you, but then the car drives, it's a complete difference, right? So there was lots of discussion going on what kind of message we can actually convey or should convey to pedestrians and cyclists. And that was more or less the stuff that we focused on in this kind of project. And at the German Aerospace Center, we were lucky to get a team there that was willing to work on that kind of question and on these kind of interfaces. And then we basically did a virtual reality simulation scenario where we took a whole room and we put a little cupboard on the floor to simulate a pavement edge of the pavement to step down from, and the people had the VR goggles on and had to cross the path, and we simulated a self-driving car approaching them and transferring or sending different kind of signals, visual signals only, conveying different messages, and tried to experiment and test which of our concepts might be the best one. And that's basically also, all of that was basically then also published in a case study in EPIC 2018 in Hawaii.
Fantastic. You know, I often wonder how many people would consider the fact that, you know, here's automated vehicles and you're studying cycling and its relations to automated vehicles. How many people would consider that that is a place for anthropology, right? I think people would think, oh, that's very highly technical. There's a lot of engineering involved, and you've probably got to do some surveying of measuring the space and all of this, and do some simulations, some crashing simulations, that sort of stuff. But yet, here's anthropology, and here's an anthropologist working in that space, you know, making very real, very impactful research and finding very, you know, credible insights for this study. I just think that's amazing, and I hope that anyone who's watching this video can look at this and say, look, anthropology has a place in the highest technical field you can think of, automated vehicles. I mean, we're not even really there yet, but yet the anthropologists are there and they're involved. So I just think that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, our big idol was obviously Melissa Chevkin, because she was a much more experienced anthropologist, actually engaging into the development of self-driving cars with a full-time contract and so on. And she was building up her own research team there. And I think had a lot of impact on the decisions at Nissan, right? And our biggest goal from the first semester onwards was to say, okay, we don't just want to study that kind of technology and see what kind of impact it could have. We actually want to have an impact on how this technology is developed. And if we look at other technology nowadays, then any other anthropologist can have the same goal. Mm-hmm. You can just say, okay, there's 5G coming out. Right. What kind of impact might it have on our lives in the future? Right. Look into it. And then say, okay, now that is a very interesting lead. I mean, I don't know, with 5G, everything is more connected. You're having faster internet connections. You can download movies within a second, maybe. I don't know, what kind of impacts does it have? And then you focus on one that is most interesting to you or most dangerous to society, if you will, or has the biggest business potential. I don't know what you're interested in. And then you dig into that and try whether you can find people in that environment that are willing to work with you so that you get actually access to the field in a way, but access also to the product development or development of services, and see how you can help them reflect on some of the things they just don't look into. I also, from one of your last episodes where you talked about anthropology is often the kind of last resort solution.
Yeah.
I hate that, right? I mean,
right, exactly.
I think anthropology should be the first resort to go to. I mean, I even, when in preparation for our talk here today, I was thinking to ask you that question. I mean, imagine that anthropological theories and methods, or just learning about what past scholars and practitioners of anthropology have already learned about humans and different cultural insights and so on, with all the different paths and fields of applied or anthropology, right? With physical and linguistics and so on and so on. Imagine that just a small percentage of that would actually be mandatorily taught in schools.
Yes.
How would that change society?
Yes.
I mean, everybody is getting taught psychology, or let alone the fact that so many people know how to do a SWOT analysis, right?
Right.
Or how to calculate an angle in a triangle.
Right.
I mean, isn't it more important? I'm not saying that those are bad things at all, but isn't it equally or more important that people understand some of the anthropological perspectives and maybe start sometimes question our own opinions also, right? I mean, we are in front of several elections. I think we have several people in power that are questionable. How would things change in our world if everybody got taught some anthropological concepts in school already?
Right. You know, and that's the thing. And I have mentioned that in a couple of my interviews is, you know, somehow in college, everyone missed the basic anthropology course where you learn right away about race, sexism, different cultures, that sort of thing, just the basics. And if everybody just knew those basics, there would be so much, I guess you could say, mythology or maybe even superstition or crazy ideas that people have that would just be wiped away.
Yeah. I mean, think about it, right? Should it not be a requisite for any politician, for example, to understand the different kind of social groups of society, right? Yeah. I mean, and who is best equipped to understand other groups of people that I'm not a part of or that I don't understand?
Right.
It is anthropologists, in my opinion, and maybe other social scientists, of course, but especially anthropologists are equipped with their methodologies and theories to go into a group of people or community and become one of them, right? That's what we say. We become native.
Yep.
We go native. And that way we learn to understand what are their interests and agendas and values and what things and institutes and practices mean to them in their everyday life. I think that's at least as important as the angle in a triangle.
Yeah. I mean, and we can go into any culture and know nothing about their culture at all, not even the language, and we can, for lack of a better way to describe it, figure it out and figure out what makes them tick and what makes them function. Where I think sometimes in maybe in the business world and in other areas, they want to go into another culture and say, okay, how do we have to change them to get them to come to our side? And it's, you know, and that's their idea. Somehow this other culture is flawed and we need to fix them so they'll be more like us. And that's that ethnocentric perspective, right? And it's a matter of, no, we need to change so that we can build a bridge and work together better in the long run. So
yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, so go ahead.
No, I had nothing.
Okay, so what do you think we can all do to help promote the value of anthropology in the workspace, especially in technology fields?
Yeah, something that we can all do. I mean, I think that people just need to start talking about it. I mean, you know, I also know that you always come up with that Indiana Jones example, right? And I think that's true. If you tell a friend of mine, or if I told them, hey, I'm going to study anthropology, they said that, or they thought I'm going to look into ancient rituals, right, or some similar things, and yeah, I think that's not the point, right? I think people need to understand that anthropologists are actually as I said, the kind of best people to understand other cultures, and that we are able to understand, for example, socio-technical networks, right? How things influence each other in their everyday life. If you look at the world of a group of people and you try to understand them, doesn't matter if it's for your next startup idea to create a new app. You can also try to understand your target group and what kind of apps they already interact with, and how your app or new technological product fits into this picture. And I think I would love that more and more people out there understand and know about anthropologists and understand that we are really, really well equipped to do that kind of thinking, analysis, and I think that this work is super important for many reasons, but I think that it also has lots of potential for startup work, for example, right? I mean, I truly believe that that we are. So if you look at why startups fail, for example, right? 80% of startups fail. Why? And the number one reason that is always mentioned is it's about the team. It's about well execution, right? I think it's about well exploration. I think that one of the number one reasons why startups fail is because they never achieve product market fit. They never actually build a product or service or solution that is really of value and means a lot to people. And I think the unicorns or the companies that achieve that are unicorns. I truly think that the problem of startups and new innovation projects does not occur in the later stages of product building, but in the early stages of properly and iteratively exploring what's the right problem to solve. I'm coming back to why I actually turned to anthropology. And I think in the end, it's a problem of focus. In contrast to what I've heard a lot, and what you might hear from many people saying, hey, we need to narrow down now, take a decision, no more exploration, we need to converge, right, and narrow down. I believe that the real problem is actually that people have never been open enough to begin with, and never open enough to question their own assumptions about what problem to focus on. I think that we narrow down too early, while not even realizing that we do, right? I mean, I think that many people narrow down too early without realizing that they actually have never opened up.
Right.
And that's when people say, oh, no, your ideas sound cool, but that's really not for us. That's not really our scope. I think that's also something that you had in one of your last episodes.
Yeah.
And I think the real problem for so many innovation startup projects is that people simply don't spend enough time on exploring potential ideas, strategies, or problems to solve. People simply too often focus on execution rather than thinking about what to execute or what to build. And I'm not the only person saying that, right? There are multiple quotes that talk about this stuff. For example, Simon Sinek said, better moving slow in the right direction than moving fast in the wrong. And then just simply burning all your cash for the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. I think the solution is strong exploration in the beginning, and then taking a very well-informed and well-validated decision on what to build. And the real key to success lies in great exploration as part of execution, right? That's also, I recently gave a talk for the Applied Anthropology Network at the EASA conference this year, where I also talked about that. In our current startup project, our corporate startup project, we now ended up trying to explore and kind of build more or less simultaneously. I mean, I would even wait a bit longer with building, but the point I think is that people have to look at well execution of a product idea by saying exploration is part of that. It's not just research that comes before and that we don't need, and we don't need to have so many interviews in design thinking. We just directly go into brainstorming with Post-its. I think it's a classic problem. And also I recently read the book Essentialism, for example, a bestseller which focuses on helping people to find the focus in any kind of situation in life. And I've heard that many times, right? Marcus, stop exploring, stop opening up the scope, start narrow down now. We have to focus, take a decision and build. But the first thing that guy in Essentialism writes is that good essentialists explore first, right? So the author describes essentialists explore more options at first to make sure to pick the right one to go all in. And essentialists will commit and go big only on the vital few activities that really matter. But therefore, you have to find what's the right product first.
Right.
And exploration is then so important. And I think that this is something that we need to educate innovators in and CEOs in and hiring managers in. If we can sell them that exploration is the best way to then narrow down and focus on the right thing, then we can build our own basis for future jobs as anthropologists. I'm convinced by that, actually.
Yeah, instead of making the decision, this is what I want to build, this is what I want to sell, this is what I want to do, this is my great, huge idea, and I know it's going to be fantastic. Well, not everybody probably wants that or needs that. You know, I don't know if you get the show Shark Tank in Austria. Have you ever?
Yeah, sure.
So that's a very good example of, you know, people come up with these great ideas for these great products, and they look very ingenious and very neat, but some of them are so niche and so niche markets. Like I recently saw one where it was some kind of hammock or sleeping for campers, people who like to camp. Well, not everybody likes to camp, right? And only certain few people that like to camp are probably going to go out and buy that particular product. So, you know, how wide is the scope of this idea? Yes, you've got a great idea and it fits the people that you camp with, whatever, who like to camp. But as far as it being a wide marketing product, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because I've found myself in a situation lately where my stakeholders said, you know what, Marcus, or you know what, whole team, we want our solution to be mass market able, right? It should be scalable for the mass, but there is no such thing as mass market.
Right.
That does not exist, right? It's an imagination.
Right.
All they ask for, hey, we want to be able to sell that product to as many subgroups and sub-societies in this world as possible. So how do you find the smallest common thing they share, right? And I started to say, okay, well, maybe we'll look into something or some kind of niche part of society, niche group of people that none of the competitors have looked into yet, but where we think that might be a powerful start for us. So when you then start building the product for that kind of niche, you on the one hand, you have such a small kind of target group that you can really focus on building a great solution only for them. But simultaneously, you always have to keep in mind that it should be scalable for others as well. And I think that's a very, very difficult thing that not too many people actually manage. And I think scalability in the end most often fails by not understanding people in the right way.
So going back to your discussion about the human-machine interaction, what do companies, hiring managers and recruiters hiring for those kinds of positions need to know to understand the value of the anthropological skill set when it comes to those kinds of positions?
You mean specifically for human-machine interaction? I'm not sure if I can give you an answer specifically for that. But I think more broadly, you are trying to investigate the question what hiring managers and companies need to know so that they understand the value of anthropology, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also that's what you discussed in. Obviously, you discussed it in your last episodes, but one of the question or conclusions that I saw popping up as a pattern is that there is no one single strong answer to that question, right? And that we are maybe not yet there to say, okay, in general, hiring managers need to understand that. Actually, what I learned also from some of the other interviews that you had or that you had with Anthroperspectives is that, think about it, right? Anthropology is so broad. You can apply it for anything.
Right.
Everything is about people in this world. I mean, in our world especially, right? Not for the rest of the world, but in our world, everything we do is surrounded or somehow related to people and humans. And you have a whole team of people that focus on everything else but the human.
Right.
It does not make sense if you think about it logically.
Right.
And still we have to argue for why we need to get a place in there. Why should you hire us? It does not make sense. But what I learned from your discussions and other podcasts and talks I had is that there is so many different fields where you can apply anthropology. As you say, you are an organizational culture expert in a way, I think. There were podcasts where anthropologists go into areas of pandemic or epidemic situations and try to educate people on how to behave in the right way. Educate what not to do, what to do. I mean, we could probably use that these days, right?
Right, exactly.
There are anthropologists that are physical anthropologists or biological anthropologists that look into how we can improve technological devices for dental care and so on. I mean, anthropologists can work in every single field of this world. I'm completely convinced. But I think if I'm, for example, I thought about that today, right? Me as a junior anthropologist, applied anthropologist, if I go to the next hiring manager and they are asking me, Markus, you know, anthropology is all nice. And when I'm actually at the point that I told them that it's not about Indiana Jones, and they realize that the next thing that we have to mention to them is that we are not just the UX person that you are looking for.
Right.
We can also take on the role to improve teamwork and knowledge exchange and organizational work.
Yes.
We can also take on the role of looking into how the product, the technological product that you want to build interacts with all other kind of technological products in the world of your target group. We can look into all sorts of different things that can actually help your company. You just have to tell me which is which of those different fields that I can help you with has the biggest priority.
Yeah.
And I think what many applied anthropologists, or maybe the juniors, including myself, are often or have been missing are something or somebody that shows us the arguments, well-formulated arguments that I can go to a hiring manager to convince them, because we know about our value. I think what we lack is language to communicate it.
Right.
So one of the things that I also told the Applied Anthropology Network when I applied as the new convener was that I want to work on a booklet that is simply focusing on how to sell anthropology to any CEO, hiring manager, and so on, right? As we discussed already in our last little chat. And I think the work that you do is extremely important, but I think we need more. And what I've learned from the talks that you had before, it seems that there is no single strong answer, and that there is no list of arguments yet. They are out there, and many people, especially the more experienced ones, know them. But I think we need to write them down to also help the juniors, and then I think word will spread. And I think the next thing is that we need to go into mass media or into the business related mass media, like Harvard Business Review, like the CEO magazine that you sent me, where we also start educating them through different channels to really say, you know, I hope in a few years, we don't need to have a conference anymore that is called Why the World Needs Anthropologists.
Right.
I hope that the world will know it by then.
Right. Hopefully the world
sorry
realizes,
that I can't.
hopefully the world realizes that there's people in it.
yeah, and hopefully, and that's actually one of the other things that I'm constantly trying to work on, is working on some sort of more holistic innovation thought concept, right? I mean, in one way, we anthropologists can say, wow, it's a big win that everybody talks about user, people, or human-centered these days. But on the other hand, if you look at it from a more holistic point of view, we should talk about what others already say, like planet-centered, world-centered, I don't know, there are post-human-centered, lots of different kind of wordings for that already. But the point is that we need to reflect on us humans in it. We need to reflect on our planet. We need to somehow make sure that it's financially sustainable in our current capitalistic system, so profitable. And I think what we also need to look into is this kind of socio-technical aspect. How do humans and the technology at hand actually relate to each other? How do they influence each other? What does that do with our society, right? Best example, Facebook, social media. What's the result of the technology that we built and how we use it?
Yep. Yeah, from what you're saying, I think about one of the points would be, you see in these job descriptions, they always want somebody who's comfortable with ambiguity, right? And it's like, well, what you want then, I'm going to say it, is you want an anthropologist, because an anthropologist can go into an ambiguous situation and figure it out. And usually if you have some problem in a company and you don't know why you keep having this problem, and you keep looking at data over and over again and getting reports from this person and that person, you still can't figure it out, then you probably have a blind spot, because you're looking at data and you're looking at numbers and you're not looking at people, right? So you need to look at the people and figure out the culture or the cultures that are at play here, and figure out what is happening that's going wrong, because chances are it is a people problem. I mean, not that people are a problem, but the people problem is the fact that the leadership can't see this, and they need to see it, and it's something they need to see and deal with, and it may be very uncomfortable for them. But if you're not going to advance, you're not going to improve, you're not going to get better unless you face this problem that you have here in front of you. Face it like a grown-up and an adult, deal with it and move on, so you can grow and expand as you need to go, as you need to.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm just opening the presentation to read out the presentation from the Applied Anthropology Network talk that I gave in July, to read out one quote because I just love it, right? There was this TechCrunch article in 2020 now, this year, by John Evans, who is actually a full stack software engineer. So a software engineer says, you know, technology is not about technology. Technology is about anthropology. And he says, this is, of course, why every major venture capital firm and every large tech company keeps a correct team of elite anthropologists busy at all times with big budgets and carte blanche, reporting directly to leadership, right? Looking around saying, oh no, actually that's not the situation, right? In a sarcastic way. But I think it was hilarious that this full stack software engineer wrote that and said, hey, that's actually what we need. And I think that we can see popping up those moments and those realizations more and more. And I'm convinced that in maybe the next 5 years, that kind of small, still hidden movement, forget the small, the hidden movement is going to be a big wave, flooding many markets where people realize, okay, we have understood that we need user-centeredness. Actually, now we understand why we need anthropologists. I hope that this is going to happen very soon.
Yeah, and I think it is, and I think it's really starting. And I think one thing is, even with this COVID environment that we're in, it's actually making it easier for many anthropologists to communicate with each other. I mean, for example, you're in Austria and I'm in the United States, right? So we meet each other on LinkedIn and we can talk and have a conversation very easily. I don't have to go to Austria. I mean, not that I never really had to before, but you know, before, I think to have a Zoom call or a teleconference with somebody on LinkedIn was kind of like, well, that's just, you know, just write back and forth and send emails. It's fine. But now with COVID environment, I think people are doing that more. And I think there's even more communication going on. And I think what you're doing with the Applied Anthropology Network in Europe, and some things that I can see happening with American Anthropological Association, it's basically, we're working in the same, we're working on the same things at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's hitting. And I think too, I know some of my contacts in Spain are also looking at this. And so there's more going on in Europe. And I'm going to reach out to some other contacts I have in other countries as well and see if, you know, there's this parallel movement that's going on. Is, you know, we have to tell companies that you know, we know you don't really know what anthropology is. We're going to tell you. And when you understand, you're going to want anthropologists in your company. Don't be scared. Yeah. It's going to be okay. but
no, I completely agree. And I think, I mean, I did try to kind of talk about a few things in our interview today or talk today. The way that I think we should also try to talk about anthropology. I think that, I mean, you know, I was one of the others, right, very recently, right?
Right.
And I have turned towards anthropology because right. I was looking into how could we build the best possible products and solutions, but also especially the right ones for the reasons that we want to build them for and for people to create value. And I think as soon as we sell that argument, and I saw it working for myself now in some projects, as soon as we come with that around, instead of saying, hey, we need this theory, or look, have you ever read this, or whatever, right? We need ethnography. I think we might have to leave it out in the very beginning and just come from a completely different perspective and lead them there to understand, you know, we know what you want to achieve. We are on the same track. We also want to do that. We can tell you and show you how you get there in the best possible way. And I think that what you said about ambiguity before, I truly think that anthropologists are one of the best educated people to deal with such situations. And I have had expert interviews with some of the leading industry players for the Internet of Things solutions and companies connectivity solutions, and so on and so on, for one research report that I wrote. And what all of them and everybody else also talks about it is data literacy, right?
Yes.
We can only build great solutions, or that the best data scientists are those that understand what to do with the data.
Right.
Or what everybody else said was, we need people that do not only know how to structure data, how to analyze it. We need also those that understand what to do with it. We need them that need to understand how to interpret it, how to interpret the findings.
Mm-hmm.
We need those that understand why a specific quantitative data result or pattern might actually be based on wrong parameters from the beginning. Well, that's something, for example, that we try to bring in very strongly into the European Horizon 2020 project Interact about autonomous vehicles, where we try to say, okay, look, if you are designing your survey that way, or you're collecting large data sets in that way, and about that kind of traffic scenario, and from that angle, looking at the situation, you're missing this element of the context, and you're missing this element. And you will be limited in the way you can conclude things in the end. So, I mean, from a mixed methods approach, there are obviously the sequential and other ways to combine qualitative and quantitative data. But I think that anthropologists are especially well equipped in looking at the limitations of a specific research design and how you collect data. And based on that, and based on our skills to interpret results, we are probably one of the best educated people to understand what to do with data. And I think everybody wants that. They just don't know that anthropologists is what they're looking for.
Right. And especially, I think, too, with quantitative data, someone may look at quantitative data who's not an anthropologist and say, okay, I've got all this great data. What do I do, right? And an anthropologist would say, oh, look at all this great quantitative data. Here's what more we
exactly
need. We've got to go out and we've got to ask people why this is the way it is, because you can't make a decision based just on this. You've got to understand the context and the culture around it.
This was actually so apparent for me in my current project, right? I mean, I'm working again with a data scientist, a computer engineer that does data science for some parts. And he always says that if we want to collect data, we first need to know what we want to do with the data.
Right.
And I'm always saying, no, I think we need to collect all sorts of data and see what we can learn from that. Right. And I think it's probably lying in the middle. You need to for some part you need to narrow down and don't collect everything, but you definitely have to challenge yourself and say, okay, if I collect that kind of data with that kind of method, what kind of perspective do I actually have on reality? Because every kind of research approach is only representing parts of reality. And if you are not aware of what that means for your results and conclusions, I mean, there's big risk of failure, right? And bias and whatever. And I mean, I'm totally convinced about that. I think there are Tricia Wang is one of them that is working on thick data, right? And tries to tell the world how important it can be that we are adding meaning to your quantitative data, for example. I think there are many more, and I think I'm 1000% convinced that we will succeed in getting our part and playing a role in this future with data science and big data. I'm seeing it already happening now. I've participated in different tutorials at this year's EPIC conference just 1 or 2 weeks back now. Super interesting tutorials where we can see how anthropologists and ethnographers are also trying to understand the data scientists, right? Just the way design anthropologists work also. I mean, design anthropologists are not only trying to facilitate design and innovation through our own kind of ways. There's also design anthropologists that look into what it means to do design and how we actually stage temporary spaces for brainstorming and so on, and how the designer, him or herself, is influencing the innovation process. And that is already also happening with the data scientists, right? How does the data scientist and other stakeholders in the innovation process actually influence the outcome? And we are already doing that. We're learning a lot about it. And we will find our way to add meaning. I just wanted to say something else, but I'm forgetting it now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is really the end of the questions I have for you. Anything else you want to add and say, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I just remembered what I wanted to say about the whole data science topic. There's, I read about that maybe 1 year ago or so, or half a year ago, that there's something called like data ethnography, right? Where we try to trace how algorithms, for example, come to specific conclusions based on all the steps we take in the process of building that algorithm, to analyzing the data that we collect and so on. I think that's super interesting, because we are running into more and more solutions or situations where we have black box algorithms, where we don't actually understand how they got to their conclusion, but we know, okay, it works. We just don't know when it fails, and that's a big issue, right? So I think data ethnography, for example, is going to have a big impact and role to play in the future as well. I mean,
how people decide what data, what is the process for gathering the data or pulling the data, and how did they come to the decision that this is the data they need to solve the problem they think they have?
Exactly.
Right? That is, I've been actually thinking about that a little bit as well. You know, on how much, and I mentioned this on one of my other ones, is that a lot of people in leadership and upper management, they just want to be able to push a button and get the data that they want to be able to make the decision. They want it on a dashboard and they want it easy. Well, if you're going to do easy and you're going to do fast, you know, with that, you know, good, fast and cheap thing, you're not going to get, it's probably not going to be very good data, right? And it's probably not going to be very cheap or inexpensive for you to implement whatever it is you're trying to do. So just because you get the data fast doesn't mean you're getting good data, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's sort of like the fast food mentality, right? You may get it fast and you may get it hot, but it's not going to be very good for you, right?
Yeah.
So that's something I think we all struggle with, and I think we all in companies, they all know time is money, but at the same time, yeah, well, how much does it cost to build a product that's not, that nobody wants? You know, you may have done it fast, but if nobody buys it, how much money have you wasted then?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, I mean, one of the easy examples any anthropologist or social scientist can give a hiring manager or a data scientist on why it's important to add meaning to our quantitative data, I think is the example of Clifford Geertz with thick description saying, you know, what does a wink mean in different contextual settings, right? If I'm winking to a person in the club, am I flirting? If I'm winking to somebody to give a hint, hey, now start, it always has different meanings. And on the quantitative Excel sheet, you might just say, okay, at time 2 minutes and 20, there was a wink. We don't know what it means.
Right.
So that's just maybe an easy example. Well, the other thing that I just wanted to mention briefly, maybe as a final comment here, is that I just recently got elected as a convener, kind of a board member of the Applied Anthropology Network, and I just wanted to take the chance to also promote to the listeners kind of the mission and the vision of the Applied Anthropology Network. So basically, there are, I think, let me just look it up quickly. There are already, I think, several thousand members and conference participants over the last year. There was last year's the Why the World Needs Anthropologists conference, for example, happens every year. That's part of the Applied Anthropology Network and the ASA as well. We conveners and other great volunteers help organize that conference every year. The next topic is Mobilize the Planet, coming up next year in 2021. So that's about activism also, but also kind of this planet-centered initiatives and how to innovate in such a kind of style. We are having satellite events. So if you are, for example, from Vienna like me, and you want to say, okay, I want to communicate with other anthropologists in Vienna or in the region, then you could, for example, organize a satellite event to talk about a specific topic. You can also say, I want to do a specific topic in Vienna, and everybody could join. I mean, these days it's anyway going to stay probably in the virtual space, but that's an option. And in general, we just want to connect applied anthropologists. I think there's big potential to also connect juniors to the more experienced people, to get mentoring, to kind of ask questions also potentially about how to present yourself in front of hiring managers. That's something, as I said, that I want to work actively on. I also want to work on the whole data science topic. I mean, there's I've seen at Epic some projects of Spotify working with anthropologists, where the anthropologists helped to kind of categorize the meaning of listening to music in your everyday life, which they then use to improve the recommender system algorithm of Spotify. And I think that's definitely something that I also want to work on. And if there's anything out there that is interested in the topic, please reach out to me and reach out to other people from the Applied Anthropology Network. They are all lovely people, very open. We don't bite, and we would love to hear from anyone that is not yet a member and wants to engage in the interesting talks that we have.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, Markus, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad we did this. So
yes, absolutely.
Thank you again. And this will be posted today.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Keith. It was a pleasure, as I knew from the beginning. Very interesting. I'm looking forward to hear more Anthro-Perspective episodes. And I'm hoping that we manage to kind of bring all of this together from the different movements in the future, collect the arguments that we need to also promote ourselves and anthropology in front of CEOs and hiring managers to convince the world that there is a very, very important place for us. So thanks for all the work that you do in that field also.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Keith. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.